And welcome to the channel. In today's episode, I'm going to have two parts. The first part of the episode, I want to just give you some tips for summertime photography, capturing bees, butterflies, and bugs out in nature. So most of my images capturing these insects are on flowers, and they are all taken in natural light. So I'm going to walk you through some of my tried and true tips for getting these magical shots. Then in the second part of the video, I'm going to edit an image that I recently took using some very simple steps using just Lightroom Classic to really bring out details and enhance the image in a beautiful way. So I will place in the description where the editing portion of the video is located in case you'd like to skip ahead. All right, so let's jump in and talk about just some tips for capturing these wonderful summer insects. So of course, summer is a great time to get outdoors and be in nature. Even if you're a landscape photographer, there will be times where you're going to spot gorgeous insects flying around and you may want to capture them. So my first tip is using the right equipment. And this would be talking about lenses. So I'm a firm believer that you can use any lens in any setting. You just have to work with that lens. But to make it easier, I do suggest that for shooting insects on flowers, you either use a macro lens that allows you to get pretty close or a telephoto lens. I often like to shoot with my 70-300. This allows me to stand further away from my subject and then zoom in really close. That lens is also one of my fastest lenses, and so it's going to help me be able to shoot with a wide aperture like 2.8 and nail my focus. So that would be my tip, trying a macro lens. You could also use extension tubes, but a zoom lens works really great. My second tip is if you typically shoot on a tripod, you may want to give that up for these shots. Handheld shooting is going to be much more practical so that you can move around your subject and really think about your composition as you're shooting these moving objects. I also encourage you to set your camera to burst mode, especially if the insects are flittering around. It's going to help you get multiple shots, and I am sure you'll have one that's in focus. So I love to shoot in natural light, and I think it really works best for photographing bees, butterflies, any type of insect. It really helps bring out the colors and details in their wings and their bodies. I encourage you to shoot during the early morning when they're just waking up. But the absolute best time of day is going to be after 4 o'clock in the evening when the light starts to get softer and the insects are definitely getting in the last sweet nectar of the day. I typically find that is when butterflies are the most active. The light is also soft and it really helps to capture these subjects in a really beautiful manner. Now, I don't wait too late in the day because you will see less activity and it's harder to capture them in darker light. Now, if you're going to shoot during midday when the insects are active, you're just going to have to deal with harsher light unless you have a diffuser available or your subjects are in the shade. So let's talk about some camera settings. Set your camera to aperture priority, which is my choice, or manual mode. You want to make sure you have a fast shutter speed to freeze the bee's movement and use a medium aperture. Now, I like to shoot a little wider open, so I'm typically at 2.8 or f4, but you can modify that as needed if you want more detail. If light works and I can get that fast shutter speed, I will shoot at f4 or lower to really get that soft background. So you want to keep a single autofocus point trained on your subject. Now, some cameras offer continuous autofocus or tracking modes for birds and wildlife. You can try those options if you like. I have played around with them, but in my experience, spot focus absolutely works the best. What I like to do is keep the spot focus in the center of my frame, and then I move myself to get that insect in that center. So I'm changing and moving my composition so that I nail that focus. And that works really great for me. Now, tip number 6 is one that may seem like common sense, but I teach a lot of photographers, and I think having patience and observation is one of the most important tips. Bees, bugs, butterflies can be very unpredictable, so you want to just spend a few minutes observing their behavior. What I have found is that if they are getting nectar and pollen from a particular flower, they are going to stick in that area. Even if they fly away for a minute, they will typically come back. And sometimes they'll leave, come back, leave, come back. And so if you're patient and you get all your settings ready and you're prepared, you are going to get some great shots. So once I find insect activity, I will stick around for 10, 15 minutes, continue to make some test shots, and wait for the insects to rest and then get those shots that I want. Now, if the bees are just zipping around or other insects and they're just not landing for very long, then it's probably not the best time of day to capture them. And I would suggest trying again later. Now, background and composition are always critical in photography, so you want to pay attention to that when composing your shot. So there have been many times where I would have loved to get a shot of an insect of some kind on a flower, but the background was so distracting that it would have just been a throwaway image. So as you're preparing your shot, move yourself around, think about what's in your background, and maybe shoot from a lower perspective, as I did in this image on the right, or shoot from a higher perspective, or angle yourself to avoid anything distracting. Again, a longer lens like a 100 to 300 can really help allow you to get that perspective. Again, think about shooting from underneath a flower to get the subject or even above for those dynamic compositions. So here's some images that I shot. I was out shooting these sweet little flowers and this little fly or little sweat bee landed, and I just loved the color combination and brought that out. These are swallowtail butterflies, and they love zinnias. So if you plant or grow or know someone that has zinnias, they absolutely love them, and they will stay on them for quite a good length of time. So it allows you to really capture their beauty. Now, this is just a fun, different shot of backlighting and how it showcased this beetle. Not that I wanted the beetle in my flowers, but it was there. Another bumblebee and a dahlia. Dahlias are great flowers for pollinators, and often in the mornings, you will find large bumblebees asleep inside a large dahlia. So that can be really fun to photograph. Another butterfly. This is a larger scene, so sometimes it's great to just stand back and capture the beauty of the moment, the entire scene around you. And so that is something that you can do as well. These little moths, again, love the zinnia flower, and I just thought their face and the detail was just so magical, and I loved being able to get this composition and the focus and the clear background. Now, this was shot with the zoom lens, and it does have that softness behind with the focus right there in the center. This was out in a sunflower field, and I couldn't get very close, but I had my zoom lens. I loved the color combination. This sunflower was exactly this color. You could barely see the butterflies, and I zoomed in as far as I could and was shooting kind of up into the sky for this image. And here's our little guy again that I captured on the spring alliums. He was just hanging kind of upside down. I thought it was a really fun little image and just a fun photo shoot to play with. All right, so in the next part of this video, I'm going to walk you through editing this image and some of the tips and tricks that I use in Lightroom to just edit an insect image in a really simple way. So let's get started with our editing. So I'm here in Lightroom Classic, and I have a couple images that I took in a recent garden photo shoot where I was capturing some flowers in the garden, and then it was late in the evening. So I had this gorgeous light, and I noticed these little tiny moths just flying around. and I thought it was really, really fun and wanted to experiment with trying to capture them. They were actually pretty fast, so I had to work with my skills of patience and just waiting to see them land. So I had this image. I just liked that he's kind of hanging on the bottom of this. I really liked the composition, and I was able to get some pretty good detail on this little guy. So I thought we would edit this one together today. So as I'm looking at this image and assessing it, the first thing I do is look at my histogram, which is pretty good. I don't have any major issues there. But the big thing that I have with this image is this line. I don't want to crop it. I love the negative space. I think it really draws your eye over to the subject. So what I'm going to do is take this image straight into Photoshop. So edit in Photoshop. Now, I like to go ahead and tackle things like this that stand out in my image, and then I can make my final adjustments and tweaks to color and detail on the bug. So let's jump over to Photoshop, and I'm going to show you a really quick way to address this. I'm going to first duplicate my background layer. I like to do that, and that way I've got a copy. And so there's a couple ways that I could do this. I could try the remove tool and come down with it. I think I'm on that right now. And I could just play with that. And we can go ahead and see what that does. And, you know, I could keep working over it. So that's one way, but it's just making things even more challenging. So I'm going to delete that layer and say yes. And I'm going to duplicate again. The other option is I could use the clone tool. And that's one of my favorite tools when I want to really shift the background. So what I'm going to do is start right here, click the Option key so that I have my target. And then I'm just going to come over and I'm just going to start going down. And so you can see I'm able to really blend what was around. Now, when you get down to the bottom, it gets a little tricky. So we're going to do another target and come down and clean that up. All right, so I think that did a nice job. Now, what I want to do next is actually add some of this green color all around the background to give it more of the glow and the texture that's there. I don't want a distracting background. So let's go ahead and I think what I want to do next is add a transparent layer. I'm going to go to the eyedropper and I want to select this green color. Select it where it's soft. I'm going to grab my brush. I want to make sure it's on soft round, and I'm going to put the opacity really low, like about 20%. Come in with a large brush, and I'm just going to pop in this green color at a really low opacity over these areas. I'm going to come along this edge, and I'm just kind of creating my own texture with this. I'm going to add some around here. And this is just going to blend. I'm going to make it a little bit heavier on these darker areas and come around like that. Now I'm going to grab the eyedropper and I want to grab this lighter color and go back to my brush, and I'm going to do the same thing. Just going to kind of pop it around. And this is one way that you can enhance your background without adding a texture or doing too much effort. So I'm just kind of blending these colors around. Now right here where it's next to where this light was, I'm going to make it a little bit heavier. Now we can go back to the eyedropper, and I'm going to grab this even lighter color, grab my brush. I'm going to take the opacity down a little bit further, and I'm just going to pop some of that in to give that glow. Now, if I still wanted to add some texture to bring some more of this detail, I could also grab the clone tool. I could take the opacity down, again, really low. I can copy this, and then I can come over and just, what I want to do is grab this as the target. Let's make this smaller. Let's get that target. And I can come over. I think the opacity needs to be even lower. And I can just pop some of that in around this area of the image. Now you have to keep selecting it so that you don't get a line. So you can see. Now let's raise the opacity. That's looking a little bit better. I want to just take this slow and easy so I don't have to undo it. So I'm just bringing some of this golden light that was here kind of around the rest of my image. Now I'm going to increase the opacity as I go. Just going to kind of come around, pop that in. All right, so I think that looks pretty nice. Now, once I edit this image, I may decide to come back and add a texture or do something else to this side of the image. I haven't decided yet. So now what I'm going to do is do File, Save, and it will take it back to Lightroom. Now, if you use Adobe Camera Raw, you could go to Adobe Camera Raw and continue editing your image. It will be the exact same process as Lightroom. All right, so this image is going to load up and save in just a second. And once it does, I'll show you the difference in the before and after. And then the next step that I would take is to make any tweaks to my colors, and then I would work on my little bug here to give him some beautiful detail. All right, so let's go to, this is our after, and this was our before. So you can just see how I've just softened that background, given it that nice evening light that we had. And I may continue to do a little bit of work on this. I may even add some light. I do have a video about adding light to your images, so you can check that link out below. So now let's go ahead and finish up editing this image. So I think the next thing I would do is come down and I want to do a little bit of color adjustment. So I'm going to go to saturation. I want to increase the purple just a little bit. So I'm going to pop that and probably pop the blues. No, I don't want to darken it. So let's go to luminance and just brighten that purple a little bit and brighten the blue because there is some blue in there. I like the green. I'm not sure about these aqua tones. So let's go back to saturation and see what it does to adjust. Yeah, I'm not seeing that. I am seeing some green here. And we'll leave it the way it is. And the yellows, I may actually add some luminance there, just brightening the yellows a little bit. All right, now I do have some shadows right here in the image that I just noticed. You just have to decide if you like that or if you want to brighten it. If you feel like it's distracting, we could easily do a linear gradient. And we could come down here and then we could just open up those shadows and open up maybe the whites and a little exposure if you wanted to. So just a little bit there can make a nice difference. I think it's not quite as crunched up is what I like to call it, by opening up those shadows just a little bit. All right, so next we want to tackle our little bug here. Now there are several ways to edit an insect. I'm going to use Lightroom today. We could also take this into Topaz and do a sharpen, Topaz sharpen. We could take it into Topaz Studio 2 and add some detail. We could take it into Luminar Neo. So whatever program you use, if you wanted to really bring out the details in your little bug, there are so many options available. And I will be doing a video soon about adding details using multiple programs. So watch for that one. All right, so now I'm going to create my mask. I'm going to do the object mask. I like to use the square. I'm going to come around and just hover around this bug and get it all set. Now, I'm not too worried about these little antennas. They weren't really sharp in focus. I'm not trying to make this a perfect bug image, so I'm going to be okay with this overlay. And so now what I want to do is come down and I want to start with adding a little bit of texture and add a little clarity just to bring out some details. I don't like to add too much. We can do a little sharpening and we can reduce some noise around the bug. Now we can also look at the color, and he was pretty neutral. I'm going to go ahead and saturate just a little bit and give just a tiny pop of exposure. Usually about 0.10 to 0.20 is going to do the trick. And for this guy, he does have a lot of black points, so I am going to darken those to bring some emphasis to the black. I could even try using the tone curve. There we go, just a little bit there to pop that. Now, if you're wanting to see your progress as you go, you can turn your mask on and off. And look at that. We can see that detail. Let me zoom in a little bit more for you. So you can see we've kind of brought out the detail in the fur, in the eye, and the coloring. So I think that looks good. Now, I also notice, I think there's a little blurb here. I could also delete this antenna if it's distracting, but I'm going to leave it. It tells the story of this little guy, and I think it works. So let's go back to our basic, and I am going to grab that heel, and I'm going to come down to the remove tool. I'm just going to clean up what's ever here. I think it's a little bit of some movement from our little guy here, and that did the trick. So just want to clean that up. And now let's scroll back and look at before and after. Just some quick edits on this. And then if we go to, we've got our image here, and I want to show you the first image. Let me zoom in a little bit. There we go. So this was our first image to start with. And here we are after making our Photoshop adjustments and those edits of the bug. You can see the bug difference there. So I'll show you that one more time, before and after. Again, you could edit adding detail to this using multiple programs, but for this image, I am great with just using these awesome tools here in Lightroom. Now, the last tip that I would have for this image is if you wanted to add some extra light. So, you know, when I shot this, the light was mainly over here, but there was some light in the garden. If we wanted to enhance that, there's a couple ways I could do it. First would be I could come in and add a linear gradient. I like to use a linear gradient because it's very soft, and we can also control the amount of it. So what I can do is add some warmth right there with the yellow. Could also add a little pop of some exposure if I really want to give this a bright pop, and maybe open up the shadows a little bit. I'm going to play with that light right there. And again, you can reduce the amount or increase it. So if we just want to do a little bit, we can come in with that. So that is absolutely matching the light here on our subject and on our flower. The other option would be, my favorite is adding light in Topaz. There are some awesome options there. I'll link my video below on how to add light to a subject. And I've got 4 different ways that you can add light to an image using 4 different programs. So I'll link that below. I hope this summer that you enjoy playing around with capturing insects, bugs, butterflies that are out in nature, and giving it a try, and then editing them to bring out details and emphasize the gorgeous summer light. Thanks, everybody.